Welcome to another episode of Axe of the Blood God, an independent RPG podcast. I'm your host, Kat Bailey. Joining me, as always, my lovely co-host, Eric Van Allen.
Hello. Glad to be here for another excellent week of Axe of the Blood God, and totally not exhausted from an entire weekend of charity streaming, which was very, very excellent.
Nadia went out to get some cigarettes to recover from her charity stream experience. So instead, we have former Game Informer editor. It's Brian Shea.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Sorry I'm not Nadia.
It's okay. You never have to apologize for not being Nadia. Otherwise, we would be apologizing every single episode. Mm-hmm. But we brought Brian on because we're going to be recapping Gamescom 2024, in which there were a few RPG announcements that will be of interest to our audience. We'll also be talking about a little game that just came out called Black Myth Wukong, which is having a little bit of a moment. And of course, we'll be talking about everything that we've been playing, including an update on my journey into Final Fantasy XIV. Just got 14 launcher installed on my Steam Deck. We're in. We're going. It's happening. All right, but before we get to that, first of all, thank you so much for all of your generous donations on the Axe of the Blood God charity stream benefiting Trans Lifeline last weekend. We made more than $18,000. It was an incredible night, a really wonderful night of community and joy and fun. We had such a great time. If you want to go check out some of the VODs from that night, go check out our Super Mario RPG run with Moonblaze Wolf. Very, very fun. I was half delirious from fatigue during that speed run, but we had a great time all the same. We started our Baldur's Gate 3 run, and we have the first episode of that over there. And of course, we also did things like our Nuzlocke run. We played Mario Party. We did video game Tinder. It was great. As special thanks to Drew RWX, just an amazing amount of money donated, and also our current reigning Arch Sorcerer of the Blood God. I see them in the chat right now with the rest of the Stars of Destiny. Drew, you rule. Mm-hmm. And also VV Complex, who did a huge matching run. And VV, of course, is a friend of the show, long-time listener, has actually been on here as another former Arch Sorcerer of the Blood Gods. So much love to Vivi as well, and much love to the rest of the Stars of Destiny, Anthrax Bees, Harvest Lunatic, Laguna Matata, Mango Alts, Nuclear Sandwich, Sardin, Spooky Man BR, Spyrus, and Teeps. They all hang out with us over in the Discord for the pre-show and the post-show that happens around every single recording, which happens on Saturday. It's at 9 a.m. Pacific on twitch.tv/bloodgodpod. Make sure to come and listen to us. And please rate us and review us on the podcatcher of your choice. Subscribe to us on patreon.com/bloodgodpod. We're about to do another Pantheon vote. And the next Pantheon vote, Eric, you want to tell them what the next Pantheon vote's going to be?
Yeah, so obviously, October's coming up. There's a lot of big games, but a big notable one, especially for, me and other fans of this developer in particular, Dragon Age, the Veilguard is coming out, and we're going to do a Dragon Age Pantheon. So we're going to put, Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, Dragon Age Inquisition in. But here's the thing. Written in the bylaws of the Pantheon, coded in the deep sorcery and witchcraft that, encapsulates our Pantheon, we need to have 4 games up for nomination. We cannot not have 4 games. If we do, bad things happen. So
the spirits become angry. The Blood God would curse this Pantheon, and so we must have 4 games.
The Blood God likes nice round numbers, and so we thought
Blood God likes squares. That's his favorite Tetris block.
And so we thought that we need to find a game that we can put in that feels at least adjacent. And, Dragon Age is a game about brotherhood. It's also a game about dark fantasy. It's a bit of a chronicle. There's a lot of anthology work happening here. So Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood will be the 4th game on the Dragon Age Pantheon poll. And here's the thing. We put it there because we need to fill a spot, but y'all are able to vote. So if this is a thing that y'all want to vote for, you can do it. It's in your hands, and you're not allowed to complain at the end if we do get a Sonic Chronicles Dark Brotherhood Pantheon, is all I'm saying. But we will do it if it gets voted for. So it's in there.
We're just encouraging our audience to unleash the wild magic with Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood, or as we would call it, I suppose the Chaos Emerald magic, you could say. But go and vote. That poll will be up on Wednesday. Please look forward to it. That is available to all of our subscribers.
I guess today starts my campaign to get people to vote for Sonic the Dark Brotherhood.
Oh, we're doomed. We're not talking about Dragon Age this month. It's going to be Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood.
It's all in your hands. I did tell Kat the funniest thing that could possibly happen is that Sonic wins the Dragon Age month. That's an incredible sentence, and I will absolutely do a podcast based on it. So we will play the game. We will talk about the game. We will seriously consider the game. Hell, I might even stream some of it if we get there. But could also talk about Dragon Age if y'all actually want to talk about Dragon Age and have a buttoned up serious Pantheon for October. So balls in your court.
All right, we'll get to our Gamescom recap in just a second. But Brian, it's your first time on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about some of the projects you've been working on post Game Informer?
Sure. So my name is Brian Shea. I was the online content director of Game Informer, and I was there for nearly 10 years. Almost made it to that 10-year mark. So bummed that the magazine closed down before I could reach that decade and make it official. But just about 10 years I was at Game Informer. Prior to that, I had freelance bylines at like official Xbox magazine, Kotaku, IGN, Joystick. But yeah, so I've been in games media for just around 16 years, if you count the smaller blogs I was working on, going to PAX and interviewing developers and doing stuff like that. But yeah, so ever since Game Informer closed at the start of August, I have been really bolstering this podcast that I've been hosting since 2021 called All Things Nintendo. And the name is pretty self-explanatory. It just is any and all news, games, historical looks at Nintendo games. So, and it's not always just focused on Nintendo. It can be things that are like Nintendo adjacent. Like I just had the Console Wars author Blake J. Harris on the show to talk about Genesis and kind of like its impact on Nintendo in the 90s. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be doing a Dreamcast retrospective here in a couple of months or a couple of weeks. Nice. And very much looking forward to that. So, things that are Nintendo adjacent also get talked about. One time I did an entire history of the Street Fighter franchise just because they have a little bit of history with Nintendo. But yeah, more often than not, it is that. And then as part of Game Informer closing down, I had a little bit of extra time on my hands. I had a free Patreon once I took the podcast independent, because it actually started in 2021 under the Game Informer umbrella. And then we had a layoff earlier this year, unfortunately. And I was like, well, I just don't have time to do a podcast during work hours. So I ended up taking it independent. And that turned out to be very serendipitous, because had I not done that, the feed would have been lost to the ages, basically, when Game Informer was closed earlier this month. But I had a free Patreon just to kind of have a community. And I had long-term plans to add paid tiers. But now I do have paid tiers. And part of that is to get an entire second podcast that is kind of games industry wide. So I can just talk about whatever topics I want. I just had Twitch streamer Mills on my show to talk about the state of sports games in 2024. And then prior to that, I had a friend of mine on. We were talking about kind of superhero games through the years. So just kind of having fun talking about whatever really strikes my fancy. I have a couple of embargoes coming up next week that I'm going to be focusing. It's called All Things Gamers. So kind of keeping consistent with that branding. But yeah, so it's been fun. I've really appreciated all the support over there, and very excited to kind of take this podcast to the next level.
Yeah, Mills is one of my favorites, and obviously go and support all of Brian's podcast adventures and all of our pals who were previously at Game Informer. They're a talented bunch. All right, let's talk about Gamescom 2024, which is happening this weekend. As of the recording of the podcast, it will have just wrapped by the time that we put our show out. Most of the big announcements aren't super relevant to RPG fans, though there were a few. For example, do you like Borderlands 4 RPG fans? Huh? Do you like loot and claptrap and cringe humor? 'Cause we got you. But seriously, though, and it's RPG adjacent, right? There has to be some Borderlands fans there, a little bit of crossover at least.
I mean, it's Diablo with guns, right? Like, that's the whole setup. But you have to imagine a world in which a year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, let's say, people were sitting in a boardroom and they were like, this is brilliant. The Borderlands movie will come out. It will drive engagement like The Witcher did or like Cyberpunk did. And then we'll announce Borderlands 4. And it'll be like when you get double bounced on a trampoline. We just go flying up into the sun. And like, instead, what happened was Borderlands, the movie, came out of the gate and fell flat on its face in maybe the most spectacular fashion. And now Borderlands 4 arrives and people are like, I guess, like, I'll maybe play. I didn't play Borderlands 3 because nothing they really did with that seemed like it was going to interest me. They talked a big game about incorporating stuff from Tales of the Borderlands, and I really liked that game a lot. I thought Telltale did a really interesting spin on that universe and made arguably the best story in the Borderlands universe that we've had. But like, they kind of fumbled it with Borderlands 3, just having those characters kind of show up and be there and not really do much. And I don't know that a Borderlands 4 super interests me at this point, especially if they're not going to change the formula up and if it's going to just be another one of those, you know? I don't know if I want another one of those.
I was looking at some of what the fans were saying, and they said, well, we want to get back to the Borderlands 1 world building, which was apparently a bit darker than some of the rest of the series, combined with the Borderlands 3 gameplay. I'm very shrug about this series because I find the aesthetic kind of obnoxious. I know that there's a lot of... I know that there are a lot of recurring characters. People really get into the cosplay of it all. The guns can be a lot of fun. There's a co-op aspect to it. It really did kind of pioneer the looter shooter genre as we know it. In some ways, Borderlands begat Destiny, as it were. But as a franchise, it leaves me a bit cold. Brian, are you a Borderlands fan?
You know, I used to love in kind of the early days of the franchise, meeting up with friends either online or locally, and just playing a lot of like Borderlands 1 and 2. But Borderlands 3, I completely fell off. Like, I tried to play it, and it just did absolutely nothing for me. And I don't know if that's just because I feel like, it pioneered that looter-shooter genre, but I feel like it also didn't evolve with the times. And, you know, I think that Eric made a point that, I also noticed was, like, I'm sure that they had it drawn up where they were like, Borderlands the movie is going to come out, and we're going to be, like, hot on the momentum of that. Kind of like how Mario did, where Mario came out and then they're like, oh, people, like, it set the world on fire, making over $1 billion, one of the most successful animated movies of all time. And they're like, we've got Super Mario Brothers Wonder for you. And they're like, yeah, that's awesome. I'm all about Mario right now. This really had the opposite effect. And I was like, really, a Borderlands announcement, like, so close to this absolute bomb that just, like, dropped in theaters? So, but yeah, I mean, as far as the game is concerned, I probably will check it out, but it's not like one that, like, I'm like itching to play just because I tried to stick with Borderlands 3 as best I could, but it just did not resonate with me in the way the first two did. But yeah, Tales from the Borderlands rules. Oh,
that game is so good. That was a really, really, I think, a good Telltale game and a good Borderlands narrative, and did so much with those characters. And, like, I do think that Borderlands can be a good vehicle for... It's weird that we're talking about story when, honestly, like, that's never been the point of Borderlands. It's always, like, a nice addition to Borderlands at the end of the day if the story's good, but, like...
Oh, there are people who are big into the Borderlands lore, Eric.
I I think if you're going to Borderlands for the story, then you're kind of setting yourself up for a real big 50-50, and that's being generous. And like, really, you should show up for the gunplay and the mods, which are good, but I also think in a post-Destiny world, I've kind of wanted to see something new from Borderlands, something a little bit different, and kind of like varying it up, because it was a novelty. It was a different thing back when Borderlands first arrived. There weren't a ton of other games like it, but then Dead Island came out, Destiny came out, Vermintide, and games that all just kind of use the same loot system, use the same ideas, use the same everything that Borderlands does. And I haven't played a ton of Borderlands 3, but I remember playing the pre-sequel, and while I liked it, I remember thinking, I don't know what this game does that's like functionally different, notably different from Borderlands 2 or even Borderlands 1. And I would hate to think that like a Borderlands 4 is going to come out and play the hits, so I don't know what you do with that. But also Borderlands games sell like hotcakes, so we could all just be wrong here and it's still just going to sell like crazy. So
it'll sell like crazy. It was easily the biggest thing to come out of Gamescom. It was trending everywhere. But let's talk about stuff that only I care about. Specifically, the Starfield buggy is out in Starfield. So if you want to go and enjoy that hot world exploration, you got a car to drive around in now, which is pretty cool. Honestly, I actually don't hate the planet exploration that much. There's some repetitive quests to do on it. Reminds me a little bit of the original Mass Effect, actually. It's nice to have a buggy to drive around in, but more importantly, new gear, bounties, some character creation options. And I actually think that they added the mod support in now, like the real creation support in. So if you are still playing Starfield, and I'm sure there are some of you out there, there'll be a lot of good mods. What's actually really interesting to me is Shattered Space. So I don't know if y'all have been paying any attention to this. It's the expansion for Starfield. You go to House Va'ruun's hidden homeworld, and in Starfield, House Va'ruun is one of the secret horror factions, or one of the secret factions. They're religious fanatics. One of your companions, who I married, is part of House Va'ruun, actually. And apparently you're investigating a frightening cosmic threat. Cosmetic threat.
It's a cosmetic threat.
It's a cosmetic threat. You get unique weapons, space suits, and gear. It appears to be much more limited to one planet. So maybe more of a Far Harbor vibe, and it takes away some of the... the fast travel is one of just the biggest weaknesses of Starfield in my mind. It practically torpedoed a lot of that game's appeals. So I think putting it on one planet is a great idea. It'll be $30, which is wild for what, it's an expansion. I hope it's a big expansion, and it'll be out September 30th. Shattered Space. Brian, literally any interest? Question.
I would have to start playing Starfield for the first time.
There you go. Yeah.
But I've been waiting for like the opportunity to. So maybe now is the time. Now that I don't have a job. So
yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
$30. I mean, isn't that how much the entire season pass was for Fallout 4? Or was
probably?
It 40?
That sounds
about
about
30
right.
or 40. Yeah. It's just like that's a lot for one single piece of DLC.
It's steep. I don't like to harp on prices, but I'm aware that for plenty of people, it's a factor. So that number just immediately jumped out at me. Eric, you bounced pretty hard off Starfield. I assume that's going to continue to be the case with Shattered Space.
Yeah, I ain't coming back. But I do want to note that I think
I'm happy for you, or sorry that happened.
Yeah, everything about Starfield just so rubbed me the wrong way and was not the thing I wanted from Bethesda. And so ironically, Shattered Space seems like it might be the thing I actually want from Bethesda, which is they can be pretty good at doing these really contained stories. Like you're saying, Far Harbor is a great example. Some of the other DLCs for Fallout 3 and stuff are really interesting, really fun. In
fairness, being a Bethesda hater is part of your brand. It's
a little bit. Yeah, I'm not a complete Bethesda hater. I like Morrowind and Oblivion. Like, you know, we have a good time there.
So you were probably on board when Game Informer named Skyrim the greatest RPG of all time.
No, not at all. Not at all. Look, I'm gonna be nice to y'all. Y'all are my friends. I have notes.
It's part of the Axe of the Blood God lore that when that happened, we recorded a whole podcast responding to it.
I know.
I believe titled "Skyrim is not the greatest RPG ever made."
I mean,
Yeah.
I agree.
Look.
Sorry, Andy. I know that Andy kind of strong-armed everybody into making that their pick. Your pick is the greatest game of all time. And I love Andy. He's a friend, but Andy, no.
And I don't even like strongly dislike Bethesda. I think they do provide a certain thing in the game space that others don't. So I just don't vibe with that all the time is the thing. But like, I think for Starfield, Shattered Space does sound like what people want from it. And definitely like the mod support seems like it's been there. We have a writer at Destructoid who's been pretty like on the ball in terms of covering what mods are rolling out for that and also like where the mods are. Surprisingly, a lot of them are on the Creation Hub and not on Nexus or the other places you would normally look for mods. So it seems like the systems in place are really fostering a community for building that game up and modding it. Apparently the Buggy already had like multiple skin mods like within 24 hours after it came out.
It's like a Cybertruck.
Oh God! You do that and it blows up.
Probably has the similar textures as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, Starfield is one that I should be all about because it gives kind of like a little bit of like Mass Effect vibes, which Mass Effect is my favorite game of that generation, and then like Fallout 3 was literally the game that made me say, I've been writing about music for a while. Maybe I should write a video game review. And that's ultimately why I started writing about video games, was because I loved Fallout 3 so much when I bought it on closeout at Circuit City when that was shutting down.
Wow, Circuit City.
Yeah, it's really dating myself here. But yeah, so like I should be all about Starfield. Just something about it just doesn't do it for me.
It's boring, that's why. Also, it's not particularly well written, and a lot of the mission design is just okay. And the actual fast travel is kind of killer. Axe of the Blood God listeners will know that I also played this game all the way to conclusion and put it on my top 10 of the year list. So there are two wolves inside me. Mm-hmm. One wolf hates Starfield and the other wolf loves Starfield because it was a game that I've been waiting for forever. I loved Far Harbor on Fallout 4. I thought Fallout 4 in many respects was pretty flawed, but Far Harbor was chef's kiss, outstanding with the way that it implemented the 3 different factions, lots of interesting choices to be made, lots of exploration within a pretty contained space. I thought it was some excellent RPG design, so I have some hopes for Starfield. Also, House Varun is definitely one of the most interesting aspects, I suppose, of the lore to the extent that there can be. I'm optimistic about the actual mods themselves that are going to be coming out of this. And I think that in a few months, Starfield might even be fun. We'll see. But yes, I will be picking up Shattered Space and I will be playing through it. If only because I kind of want to get back on I hit a new game plus, so my ship's gone. Damn. Anyway, I miss my old ship. What can I say? All right, continuing on to other Gamescom 2024 reveals. We got a new look at a bunch of games that we had already seen. For example, we got a new look at Avowed, which IGN was actually quite positive about. We learned that the possible endings will be in the double digits, and it'll be 30 FPS on console, which is not a surprise. I really want Avowed to work out. It seems to be getting the time that it needs and the polish that it needs. Thoughts on Avowed and the evolution of Avowed? Start with you, Brian.
It's I loved the Outer Worlds. I always want to say Outer Wilds. I love the Outer Worlds. It gave me kind of like that I guess what I was kind of hoping that Starfield would be kind of close to, which is, Fallout but in space. And this looks like it's kind of like what Outer Worlds was to Fallout, Avowed looks to be for like Skyrim. And I'm really hopeful that is the case because, Obsidian's a great studio, and the gameplay, I haven't gotten my hands on it myself. We did a feature for it at Game Informer, one of our final issues, and it seemed like it was pretty positive as well. So, this is a game that is definitely going to be circled on my release calendar. The multiple or double-digit endings, that's interesting to me because, like, I'm wondering just how much choice, how much alignment you can really like manipulate once you're in there. Like, I'm currently just thinking of like how many different endings were there in Mass Effect 3? Not that many. So that had a lot more choice than I was envisioning for Avowed. So we'll have to see how it really comes along with that.
I think on the ending talk, one thing you have to consider, and that kind of gets played with, especially by, dev teams that are trying to sell their game, marketing teams that are trying to sell their game, is that what do you define as a distinct ending, right? Is it like a completely different end segment of a game where like you are doing different things a la Triangle Strategy where you have like fully branching paths and things like that? Mm-hmm. Or is a distinct ending like, oh, instead of this character talking to you or teaming up with you in this mission, it's a different character? Like Cyberpunk, I think, has arguably a lot of different endings, but then like when you actually narrow it down into what is functionally the ending of that game, I think it is like still single digit. Maybe Phantom Liberty changed that, but it's whatever you define as an ending kind of shifts. But to Avowed, I will say that this is Obsidian going back to Pillars. I believe it's a Pillars of Eternity game, and I am kind of interested in that. And I also think that like for as much as we are having a very like big renaissance when it comes to fantasy settings, I feel like high fantasy is back in vogue right now. We've got Metaphor coming up, Dragon Age coming up. In the anime world, we've got Dungeon Meshi and Free Ren doing huge numbers. We've got House of the Dragon on streaming. Like, it's a good time to be a high fantasy fan. I do feel like Obsidian could bring a certain vibe to fantasy worlds that other studios couldn't, and so or just wouldn't. And so I would be really interested to see how it turns out. I'm just cautious, as always, right? I feel like Avowed has been something that we haven't seen a ton of, and we also haven't seen a ton of the Obsidian that's in there. We've seen a lot of, like, look at the sick first-person combat of Avowed, and I'm like, that's not what I want from an Obsidian game. That'll be there. I'm sure it'll function. But, like, I want to see, deep branching choices. I want to see some, like, kind of cool ImSim elements or like moments where you having an item or bringing something to somebody at the right time could like shift the way that things play out, and that's kind of what I want. So we'll see. I did like the Outer Worlds. I think it doesn't get enough credit for how interesting it was and how fun it was. So I'm willing to give them some benefit of the doubt when it comes to like delivering on something.
I'll be too busy playing Monster Hunter Wilds, which did not get a release date, but I'm still assuming it's going to be coming out in February, and I expect they'll announce a release date during Tokyo Game Show, thereabouts. So I'll check it out, but I think I will February is already looking to be a very busy month. Another game that's coming out right around that same time, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which I think, unfortunately, the Kingdom Come versus Avowed comparison is going to be a tough one because Kingdom Come is looking excellent. I'm just not going to say otherwise. I was watching some of the gameplay. They did a gameplay reveal during Gamescom, and the open world looks fantastic. It really does. And I enjoy that it goes kind of deeper into sort of the combat seems a little bit deeper than you get out of your typical first-person RPG. And if we're talking about fantasy, this is like the opposite of fantasy. There's literally no fantasy elements in it, I assume. Maybe a dragon will show up in 15th century Bohemia. Who knows? But
those were real. That did happen. I don't know if you read your history textbooks, but there were dragons there.
Excellent. I will probably be playing it. It makes me think of The Witcher, Sans, the vibes. I mean, Witcher 3 obviously is Polish. This one's Czech. It's going to be set more in a city this time around, medieval city. I think that Kingdom Come Deliverance is definitely going to be one of the early sleepers of 2025. Is that one on your radar, Brian?
I mean, it's one of those games that, like, the first one when it was coming out, I was like, oh, this looks pretty interesting. And then I remember our reviewer was like, it's not very good. You probably shouldn't waste your time with
the jank was strong with the first one, not going to lie.
Yeah, especially when it first launched, I heard it was just like a kind of a glitchy mess. And so it just kind of fell off my radar. And then it developed a little bit of this cult following. And it's just kind of remained in the back of my mind ever since then. I'm like, oh, well, if they ever do a sequel, I'll check that one out. And
sold very well. Yeah.
Lo and behold, they're doing a sequel. So as long as it doesn't come out too close to like these other games that you're talking about, where like they're completely overshadowing, like if it comes out around the same time as Monster Hunter Wilds, which I've never really been a big Monster Hunter fan, but everything I've seen about Wilds has impressed the heck out of me. So much so that I went and got Monster Hunter World, and I'm going to try to start playing that sometime soon, because it's just like, it's been hard for me to really have Monster Hunter sink its hooks into me. But Wilds looks so promising that I want to kind of experience what World has to offer. So as long as it doesn't come out like too close to any of these other games, or like, who, God forbid, the Switch 2 has like a launch date around then.
We're all doomed if that happens, but it's not going to be out until
I don't think it's summer,
at least after April.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, it's actually going to be a kind of a packed start to the year for a very packed 2025 in general. But if you said, Kat, you have to choose one between Monster Hunter Wilds and Kingdom Come and Avowed, all games that are in this podcast wheelhouse, obviously I'm picking Monster Hunter. Are you kidding me? It's like my favorite freaking game.
Is Monster Hunter World the one that you would recommend for somebody like me who's never played?
Have you never played it?
No, I mean, I tried to play World at when it first came out, and it was one of those ones where it's just like, oh, something else is coming out. I have to jump on this review, which is the eternal curse of games media. But is that the one that's like the best entry point?
Yeah. I mean, Worlds and Rise, both good in their own right, and you can get them both on PC. Definitely get them on PC, I think, and play it in 60 FPS and have a great time. They're slightly different in their own way. I prefer the Iceborne expansion to the Monster Hunter Rising Sunbreak expansion. Monster Hunter Rising has more of a Japanese fantasy setting, and you can ride around in little pups, which is cute. Whereas Monster Hunter World is kind of a more straightforward, like, different settings. But I think first of all, it looks better than Rise, full stop. And has a little more of a single player campaign than Rise does, or more of a story, I suppose you could say.
You don't have to do those. Some of the
encounters are so impressive in that one. Like the one of the key big monsters at the end is awesome. Also, Rise has these really annoying tower defense segments that I hate, and that's maybe the biggest reason not to play Rise.
Well, I already bought World with Iceborne.
There you go.
Unfortunately, it was PS5. You're telling me to get it on PC, but I did buy it on PS5.
Oh, PS5 is fine. Golden. I think you can play it in 60 FPS there. Like PC, to me, PC is the way in general, but it's just fine on PS5. So as long as you're playing in 60 FPS, this is a game you want in 60 FPS if you can.
I almost always default to performance mode over like graphical fidelity.
For sure. Looking at some of the other kind of announcements and reveals, I mean, Gamescom is always a weird one because it is a game. It's a convention that's mostly geared toward European fans, and it's kind of coming after SGF. It is sort of highlighting games that are coming out in the fall and the early part of next year. Not a ton of world-destroying announcements unless you really care about Mafia: The Old Country, I suppose, which some people do. Who knows? But when I'm just wondering, is there anything else that stands out to you? I'll say that Towerborn looks pretty dope. And if you go check out our Beat 'em Ups episode last week with Matt McMuscles, I saw Towerborn for the first time during the Gamescom stream. It looks like a kind of a hack and slash, 4-player hack and slash beat 'em up game. And I'm like, I'm in. Let's go. Has some RPG elements. All right. Was that on either of your radars, Eric?
Yeah, no, I think I'd heard of Towerborn at some point, and it was always bouncing around in terms of like, oh, what does Xbox have to show? It was always kind of like related to Xbox in some way. I can't remember off the top of my head if it is an Xbox studio game or if that's just, like signed to them. But like, it does look really cool. It reminded me of Castle Crashers in a way, and it has like a really gorgeous art style, and it's got that beat 'em up vibe that we were talking about last week with Matt, like you said. So I think that does look really, really cool. Seems like a really ideal game, like summer game to me. It reminds me of the summer of arcade in the best way. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, it walks that fine line in the visual style, because like on one side of that line it could look very cheap. But I think it's on the right side of the line where it looks really stylized and attractive, and like especially some of those like bigger enemies that they're fighting. I don't know if they're bosses or just like kind of like those like more powerful grunt enemies, but like the bigger sprites, for lack of a better term, the character models, they really look good with that art style. And at first I was like, I don't know if I like how this game looks, but now it, like, after watching the full trailer, I'm like, yeah, this game is absolutely one I'm going to check out.
I just want to say that I'm panicking right now because turkeys are invading my house.
Turkeys?
It's literal turkeys. It's crazy.
I did not anticipate this.
There's one standing guard on my rooftop, and there's some in our backyard. It's crazy.
What? Why do you have turkeys in your house?
Not in my house, on my property.
You better hope they don't get
Why do you have
house.
turkeys on your property?
The turkey mafia is pretty strong here in Alameda.
Okay.
Yeah. That was a digression. Last thing I want to talk about.
Hold. We have breaking news. The house is
breaking
under
news.
siege.
Turkeys are invading my property.
Turkeys have invaded Cat Bailey's home.
Perimeter.
Like,
Last thing I want to.
No, you can't just be like, oh, but let's go back to RPG news. By the way, there's turkeys everywhere. Like, what?
They are. It's freaking me out. There's a horde of them.
Yeah, you're playing Towerborn right now. You're gonna have to go fight the turkeys after this.
Yeah. You'll go running around on Alameda. I'll go running on Alameda, and then I'll just see a horde of turkeys, and they'll look at you, and you just step away because they'll start following you. And it's kind of like being in running into the Jets or the Sharks in West Side Story. It's like, no, don't follow me. So
they start snapping with their feathers, like
good feathers.
That's the
good
geese here in Minnesota. Yeah, or gray ducks, cat, as you know them.
Mm-hmm.
As Nuclear Sandwich says, just Alameda things. But yeah, we have mild turkey problem in the East Bay. They were previously in Berkeley. Now they're here in Alameda.
Oh, they're roaming. Okay. They're migrating
Yes, they are.
Turkey. Okay. That's
The Republican Party found out that would become part of their, like, another part of their plank. Did you know the turkeys have invaded California?
The turkeys,
big turkey
they're
problem.
everywhere. The worst turkeys.
The worst turkeys.
How are we like this when
Okay.
naughty is naughtier? That's crazy.
Last thing for Gamescom, obviously the other big piece of news, and I haven't really touched on it because it's RPG adjacent, but it is relevant to RPG fans. Indiana Jones coming out on the PlayStation 5, which it's a timed exclusive. So it's coming out in the fall on Xbox and PC, and then it's coming out early next year on the PS5. And this seems to be indicative of Xbox's kind of strategy going forward, maybe a timed exclusive approach, though there's still a lot of confusion about how Xbox is going to be doing things. I think there are kind of open questions. Correct me if I'm wrong. Avowed has not been announced for PS5 at this point in time. We might want to fact check that one.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
But there are a lot of RPGs coming out on Xbox in the near future, and so there are a lot of questions about what this means for Xbox going forward, does this mean that we're going to be getting Xbox RPGs coming out on the PlayStation 5, but several months after their initial release? What do you think, Brian? Is this an indication that this is going to be Xbox's strategy going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems that way. Though I think that there was something that I saw come out about Indiana Jones where it was like they had previously said that it was going to come to PS5, and then they're like, oh, well, just because we've acquired these studios doesn't mean it's not going to come to PS5 or something like that. And then like people were like, hey, what the heck? Like, now you're saying it is exclusive to Xbox, and then suddenly they're like, oh, by the way, it's coming to PS5 just months later. I honestly think, though, that like Xbox leadership seems to want to put as many of their big games on as many platforms as possible. And I think that was kind of, I mean, it is kind of weird to see like all these like Xbox owned studios creating games for PS5, but there's also precedent for, and this is probably because of the MLB making them do it, but MLB The Show coming to Xbox and Switch, which is kind of a somewhat recent development. I like having the option to play these games where I want to play them, but it would be weird if they were ever like, oh, by the way, Halo Master Chief Collection is coming to PS5. That would be where I would be like, okay, this feels almost like borderline wrong. But then again, Crash Bandicoot is now owned by Xbox, and he used to be like Mr. PlayStation back in the PS1 days. So who knows?
One of the problems that Xbox has is that it doesn't have a lot of homegrown franchises outside of Halo over the past 25 years, which there's a difference between homegrown franchise and then an exclusive. Mm-hmm. Nintendo has a lot of great homegrown franchises like Mario, Zelda, Metroid, and it is currently in the process of turning those into amusement parks, billion-dollar movies, that kind of thing. A whole Nintendo museum, which we'll talk about a little bit later. PlayStation has The Last of Us. And Xbox has purchased a lot of exclusives, but it doesn't have a lot of homegrown franchises, so it doesn't hit as hard.
Checking the pulse on Halo right now. Master Chief, Are you okay?
Hello, are you alive?
Blinks is coming back.
I think the way that Xbox has mishandled Halo over the past decade has been just a keystone to understanding sort of their downfall since the Xbox 360 era. 343 just cannot seem to get it right with that franchise. Outside of Halo Master Chief Collection, which is admittedly good now, it wasn't good when it first came out.
So, two things. One, Halo Infinite's not in a bad place right now. I actually have consistently played Halo Infinite since it came out, especially the multiplayer. I bounced hard off the single player. I think I just didn't like what the story was doing. The open world stuff was kind of neat, but it wasn't ultimately what I wanted from a Halo. I'm very much more like Halo Trilogy when it comes to those campaigns, or like Halo Reach. I'm even weird in that, I think ODST is fun with friends, but maybe not solo. I'm weird in that respect, but Halo Reach is one of my favorite FPS campaigns. That's a digression. Halo Infinite's not that bad. It actually has a pretty reasonable battle pass system, multiplayer system, and it's a decently fun game to still boot up and play with friends. But to that, we talked earlier about what Xbox's plan for exclusives versus not exclusives are, and initially they had that we're bringing 4 games over, and they were kind of playing guess what's behind the door, guess which games are coming over, but then they were it's not Starfield and it's not Indiana Jones. And so to clarify, they were saying that of those 4 games they were not Indiana Jones, so that wasn't them saying that indie was never going to come to other platforms. However, I do think it's notable that in that moment they were we're bringing 4 games over, what could they be? But to be clear, we're not bringing over these 2 very important games, don't be scared. So now one of them's coming over, and Starfield, shout outs to Jason Schreier who had this tweet up. Right now 3 games from Bethesda, 3 different games, all kind of have different PlayStation rules, which are Starfield has no PlayStation release set for right now. It has not been in the discussion whatsoever. Indiana Jones, timed exclusive. And then Doom is set for a same-day PlayStation release. So that's three very different things from one arm, effectively, of, the Microsoft body, like the end of inside flesh blob that is Microsoft Studios right now. It's kind of a weird messaging, and it feels like they're sort of building to this thing of like, where are our games going and what are they doing? And like you said, Kat, there's not really a lot of like franchise recognition there, so there's not a lot of brand identity there. So it feels like they're starting to just make games that are going to go to a bunch of different platforms at different times. At that point, are they basically the same as a Square Enix, as a like 2K? Because Square Enix has PlayStation exclusives, quote unquote, even though they're like not under Sony. They do still have games like FF16 is only just now coming to PC. Rebirth has not been announced for PC yet, right? But I believe it's definitely going to come eventually, because Remake went to PC eventually. So that's a weird spot for Microsoft to be in as a console maker, and I think that's the weirdness, because otherwise Microsoft would just be this giant third-party publisher in the space, right? But they are ostensibly a console maker, and we still have in our heads this idea of like the console wars and stuff. And I've talked on here before about how I think that's shifting, and I think this is like a really tangible like shift in the what do you call them, the tectonic plate. This is a tectonic shift that you can feel of like things are moving underground and the industry is shifting. So not to be dramatic,
that's the conventional
about indie,
wisdom. Not the least because there's an entire generation who just doesn't really care about consoles. And there are plenty of instances in which exclusives have been shown to be overrated, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example. And the sales right there. But on the flip side, getting back to the characters, the franchises, The Last of Us and the Mario and the Zelda, Xbox just doesn't have that. Tried to turn Master Chief and Halo into a TV show, failed miserably. And if there's one way in which Xbox is really suffering and maybe falling behind PlayStation and Nintendo, it's there. Mm-hmm. It's not being able to do with its franchises what Sony and Nintendo are doing right now.
Would you consider Fallout part of that, though? Because I think at this point, I would consider Fallout a Microsoft
You're
brand.
right.
Yeah. It's
funny because I associate that more with Bethesda, and I think that's a really good point, honestly. But it's telling that Xbox gets this Fallout TV show, and they can't put a game out. Because Fallout 5 is literally years away still. And so it's almost kind of a case of misaligned timing where PlayStation released The Last of Us TV show and The Last of Us Part 1 remaster, and Nintendo put out Mario Wonder right after the same year as Mario. So
don't forget Gearbox and Borderlands 4.
Also, Bethesda's kind of interesting because ZeniMax is still an ostensibly independent part of the Microsoft game of the Xbox label. Microsoft Game Studios and Bethesda are separate. So they kind of do what they want in their own way.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that, like, when you think about it, Bethesda has been the really big pickup for Microsoft over these last few years. Like, they have been carrying a lot.
More so than Activision Blizzard in some ways, though. Like,
yeah,
maybe they'll start to reap the benefits of Call of Duty, ? We'll see.
World of Warcraft just had its expansion hit early access as well. Wow, indeed.
Wow.
They still, I posted this during the Gamescom thing where they were just bringing out tons of like Activision Blizzard people to be like, look, we're going to talk about the future ahead. There's a Sylvanas skin coming to Overwatch. And I was like, oh, that's, you know, the meme of like, it's kids in the pool. It's like the mom is holding one baby and it's like, yay. And then the other one's like struggling to swim in the back. And then there's like a skeleton at the bottom of the pool. That's like Call of Duty. Overwatch 2 is struggling to stay afloat, and then down at the bottom of the pool is StarCraft, where like I would clap if they just said the words StarCraft on stage. I'd just standing ovation right there.
Bring back StarCraft. I love StarCraft HD Remaster, a game in which I destroyed Eric during the charity stream.
You did.
Oh yeah, it was great. I think I don't have a lot of optimism for Blizzard right now, actually, because if you look at their total portfolio, this is a whole episode, but Overwatch 2, bad shape. Still one of the most played hero shooters, but it's been so long since it's been relevant. WoW just isn't the moneymaker that it used to be, and that's underwritten and funded Blizzard for so long. StarCraft is dead. Diablo 4 has been doing well, but maybe not as well as they might have hoped. We'll see about the Vessel of Hatred release. And then after that, question mark? What's in the pipe? What's coming next? Warcraft Rumble wasn't as successful as they wanted it to be. I mean, where's Blizzard going to go next?
You got to be curious about it because, like, we'll talk more about this probably in the tavern, but, like, other long-time games as service companies that kind of put out these monolithic games, that forever games that you do just constantly play, you know, every weeknight you boot up and you get into it. Even they're starting to diversify and look for what is the next step for us, because I think those veins are not running dry, but they are stagnating. And a lot of the goals of these companies, especially as they want to get more money and put other stuff out, is that they need to continue to grow. They need to expand. And so and
that's why Call of Duty has a Gundam skin for some reason, because you got to get that Gundam audience.
You got to get that Gundam aerial in Call of Duty.
What's happened to Call of Duty is one of the most bizarre things that I've ever seen. The Fortnitification of Call of Duty.
They got so scared by Battle Royale. It's crazy.
Talk about not understanding your audience. Holy cow. Okay. That's it for Gamescom.
I do
saw a bunch of games.
Real quick though, the Persona 3 DLC with
let's go.
They're doing the Pokemon Gold Silver thing where they're bringing back another protagonist for a boss fight, and I am about it.
I love
episode
that.
Aegis. Yeah.
But yeah, the Joker is coming from Persona 5 into Persona 3.
It's the Joker.
The Joker, not Joker.
I love when RPGs do this. Like Tales games do that a lot too, where they'll have like a secret super boss and it'll be like some characters from a previous game's cast. That stuff owns, and so that's a fun thing to see, especially with episode 3 or episode Aegis. I do think it's weird that you have to buy the season pass to get access to it. Like you basically have to lock into that to get into Aegis. Apparently you can't buy that separate, is my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's I was talking to some friends about it and I was like, that's strange. I don't know if I like that model.
Well, I will play that DLC someday. I'm still in the midst of playing through Persona 3 Reload as part of my This Week in GeckoCon run, and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, it's very
good. That's it for our Gamescom discussion for real. It's time now for our series of random encounters. Final Fantasy 16 has finally been announced for PC. It has a demo. It'll be out in September. Speaking of which, the Final Fantasy 16 directors think there's a chance future series entries will launch day one on PC. Meanwhile, Fantasy Life I was delayed to an unspecified date. That's a rough one for level 5. Bloodlines 2 has also been delayed to next year. I keep forgetting this one is actually coming out. Rest in peace to Eric, who I know is really looking forward to that one.
I'm curious about that one. I really just want to know.
Bloodlines 2 curious?
I want to know what comes out of the other, because I'm noted Bloodlines lover, Bloodlines 1 lover here. But like, this game has gone through such a massive journey and arduous path to eventually coming out, that like, I just want to know what it looks like on the other side at this point, because even like the main plot and idea behind it has shifted. So and changed studios. It went through all kinds of mess. Like I just want to know what comes out the other side at this point.
Amazon is still trying to find the hook for the Lord of the Rings MMO. In a new interview with Christoph Hartmann conducted by me, Christoph also had some comments about AI that made the rounds and was getting the attention of various outlets, including saying that Amazon games don't really have voice actors, which was an interesting statement by him and got some pickup. Go check out the full interview over on IGN.com. we got to see the Nintendo Museum for the first time, which looks amazing. I desperately want to go there. It has giant Wii remotes. You can play old games, cool artifacts from Nintendo, and microtransactions. So,
with that? Was it like
yeah, so they have these little event games.
Yeah.
But you get X number of coins, and the coins get you into the events, but not all the events. So you have to come to the museum multiple times to get into all of the events.
Oh my gosh.
They gamified the museum.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I feel about like the little events. It's like, yeah, I get it. Like we're gonna have like this indoor pitching machine that Nintendo made before they were a video game giant, and we're gonna have like, you can use the Super Scope or the NES Zapper to shoot Mario. Apparently, that was a very strange sequence. It's like, yeah, you can shoot the Koopa Troopas with these these guns, but you can't. Please don't shoot Peach. Just more violent than you would expect from a Nintendo museum. And then what was it? The third one that they showed? The third one they showed was just the giant controllers, I guess.
I love those. The giant Wiimote is crazy.
Yeah, it was almost
very
as tall
cool.
as like the woman they showed playing it.
And finally, Ubisoft is resurrecting Heroes of Might and Magic on the series' 30th anniversary. And now it's time for a boss battle as we head in to a quick discussion of Black Myth Wukong, which is now out. If you're not familiar with Black Myth Wukong, it is an action game, open world action game. It bears some resemblance to the Soulsborne genre, but with some key differences. It is a Chinese game. It's developed by a Chinese developer, Game Science. It has sold 10 million units and is already outpacing Elden Ring and Harry Potter. And a huge proportion of its popularity is being driven by China. There have been charts making the rounds from Simon Carless showing that something ridiculous like 85% of its total audience is currently in China. But China's a giant country, very, very big. So that has the power to drive a lot of success to a game. It is close to breaking the concurrence record, and I'm sorry to say that the fans have been pretty toxic about it, but that's pretty common these days with a lot of different releases. So
now it's interesting this would come out of China and like, having a lot of its popularity being focused on like the Chinese population. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but like a couple of years ago, didn't the Chinese government like kind of do like a crackdown on game developers back a couple of years ago? And,
there was a crackdown, yes.
Yeah, so that's interesting that like shortly after that they had this massive hit.
It's more that it maybe less of a crackdown and more saying people shouldn't be playing games so much, and it kind of made it part of the program that playing games too much is maybe not in line with what a good Chinese citizen should be doing. I want to be careful with that. But and so places like Tencent were suffering a little bit. But you have to assume that the success of Black Myth Wukong will be an attention getter. It's being treated, prior to release, it was being treated by many as sort of a coming out party for the Chinese games industry. I'd go check out Zooja's analysis of Black Myth Wukong just for a closer deep dive about what this actually means for the Chinese games industry. On a more granular level, Black Myth Wukong is being compared to Souls-likes. Like superficially, it bears a lot of resemblance to them, but it's not really like Elden Ring. For one thing, it does not have a penalty for death, and it does not have corpse runs. There's no shared currency for upgrade. There's gears and stats, but it's actually pretty simple. It's very much a simple swap for better stuff. So if you're an RPG fan going in hoping for a Dark Souls-like experience or an Elden Ring experience, you're not going to find that in Black Myth Wukong.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with Hidetaka Miyazaki about kind of like Souls-likes and like the DNA of the genre, and I would say that his philosophy on it, he doesn't claim ownership of this genre, by the way. But his assessment of it would point towards this not being a Souls-like.
Yeah. It's closer to Sekiro than anything, which tends to be lumped into the Souls-like genre because it's developed by From Software and it has much in common. I think that Black Myth Wukong and Sekiro are both very parry-based, for example. But at base, they are both very much action games. Maybe on the sliding scale from Sekiro to Elden Ring, Black Myth Wukong is just this side of it's just this side of Sekiro. So
yeah, and I feel like there's always this inclination of a lot of people to see a difficult action game or a difficult action RPG and be like, oh, it's like a Dark Souls game.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are so many core tenets that Black Myth does not possess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's really hard to separate Black Myth Wukong from the discussion around it, and if you've been online lately, you don't really need to look far to see any of that, and there's been some absolutely incredibly bad faith stuff coming out there that has caused a lot of just bizarre situations where I'm sitting here like, damn, we're just doing a redux of a lot of old shit, huh? And I think a lot of that, you know, speaks to maybe a broader issue I have with any discussion around Wukong is like, I am curious what this game is, and it feels like even the people who are banging the drum for it and being like, this is a huge victory, go us, aren't talking about what the game is. They're talking about what the game represents for them, and it's the latest in like this thing that you can stand up and say like, this is a banner for me, I win this one, and move on to the next game. But like functionally, we don't ever sit down and actually talk about the games. And whenever critique of the games comes up, then like, oh, you're critiquing the game, or you're supporting the game, and it turns into like the weird like proxy war that happens over so many video games over the last like especially 4 or 5 years. It feels like where none of it is actually being founded. And when you're trying to actually talk about the thing itself, it turns into this proxy war. So all that is to say, like, I looked at Black Myth Wukong. A friend of mine has been playing it, and I kind of watched him stream it on Discord a little bit. It seems neat. His assessment was that it reminded him a lot of like PS2, PS3 action games that were a little bit more linear, a little bit more focused, but still very much about like the boss rush, about like fighting these big enemies and stuff like that. I think like honestly comparisons to something like Metal Gear Rising would not be completely out of pocket. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know that like it really speaks to me personally. I do think it's fascinating as a representation of the power that China has in being a massive player base that does feel untapped at times. If you want to learn more about like foreign perspectives on development, because I do find that that's a blind spot for me specifically, friend of the show Felipe has like great posts all the time about legacy games from different regions and stuff like that. I do feel like there's often been an overlooked segment, and we're starting to see these studios come up and really develop things that are capturing international audience, but also like vitalizing a region that has predominantly been associated with mobile gaming, with other forms. And so to have like a AAA game come out of there that really captures worldwide attention, but also like invigorates that region specifically, is really cool to see, really interesting to see when you talk about developments in the industry. It's just every time this game comes up, I'm like, oh God, okay, here we go. Black Myth Wukong, let's talk about it. And that sucks. It just sucks. Like, I wish that wasn't the song and dance we had to do every time, because yeah. But I don't know. Game seems neat. I don't think I have time to play it with everything on my plate this year, but I got a free version of it. I got it with my graphics card when I bought my new PC. So maybe someday down the line, I'll poke away at it and see what's up. And I'm happy to see more interest in Chinese developed stuff, because I do think that I've had a couple games on my Steam wish list and stuff that come from the region, and I do think there's interesting stuff happening there that I'd like to see more attention brought to. So yeah.
And we've got a number of games coming out from China that have just really high production values. And talking about the impact of the Chinese market, an underreported story here in the US was Blizzard having to pull out of China some years ago, maybe last year, a couple years ago, in part because of negotiations falling apart between Bobby Kotick and the representatives over in China, and that had a huge impact on Blizzard's bottom line. And one of the first things that happened when Xbox came in was Blizzard immediately got back on board and getting a new contract with China, and so WoW is back there now, and that's a big one. That is a really big one for Blizzard. We were talking about them earlier. As for the game itself, it's in this class of games that I've noticed, just covering games in general, that they come out on Unreal Engine 5. They have spectacular graphics. Black Myth Wukong basically melts platform like PCs. Our reviewer over at IGN had a 4090, an RTX 4090, and it was still crashing and really struggling to keep up. You really need a top end rig for this thing, and it looks gorgeous. It's amazing, and there is a real hunger for top end, super high graphics in an open world setting, and Black Myth Wukong fits both of those categories perfectly, in addition to being about one of the classic stories from China, which is Journey to the West. A little Dragon Ball action going on right there, don't you know? But so in that, it felt like Black Myth Wukong was almost destined to be a success because it hit all of those different categories, and now it looks like it's going to be one of the most successful games of the year. I'll play it. It looks fun. It looks like a great action game, all things considered. Maybe a little less of an RPG.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out about PC, because I was like this close to buying it for my PC, but the old girl...
Don't play it on your Steam Deck.
Yeah, my PC, I was planning on an upgrade, and then Game Informer closed, and I was like, maybe I'll postpone upgrading my graphics card and getting more SSD space and everything. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Maybe I'll grab it for PS5 instead.
Yeah, I have a 3080 Super. I think it's interesting, the kind of obsession with graphics right now among some quarters of gamers, because if you look at games that have been released over the last 8 years, there's been an increase in games that frankly are designed to run on anything and don't look that amazing. Like Fortnite utilizes a lot of cutting edge Unreal Engine 5 tech, but from a visual standpoint, it doesn't look amazing, right? A lot of the most popular games around right now are not visual stunners, and games that came out 8 years ago, 10 years ago, in many respects, still hold up just fine. The Witcher 3 still looks really amazing after a couple of remasters, but I think that has made people all the more hungry for a top-end, super premium experience that is going to make their PCs absolutely cry. And I think that is at least part of the puzzle of why Black Myth Wukong has managed to garner so much attention early on.
Well, I think it's also like kind of to a similar point, is that like think about how this generation of consoles has been, where the majority of the biggest games are still coming out on like Xbox One and PS4, even in like a limited capacity. Like, oh, this is obviously a worse version of this game, but that really, I believe, has held back the advancement of some of these visuals that we probably expected when the Xbox Series X and the PS5 came out, and it's like, it doesn't look that much better. So when a game like this does come out and it does look substantially better, we're like, oh, this is what these games would be looking like had we not been kind of tethered still to the previous generation.
Well, and these games, like high fidelity games, are expensive to make too, and the scale of them is completely just in different realms. So even when you see like Metaphor, for example, is coming out on last gen systems, it doesn't surprise me too much, because it's like it's not just about audience, it's probably about cost too. Like, how much money do you want to put into making a giant game that's going to cost you a lot of money versus like what is the install base of a PS5, you know? So
absolutely,
I think that's probably why PC day one launches are looking more and more appealing, even to places like Square Enix, where they're traditionally like doing a Sony timed exclusive or whatever, they're going like, well, PC has a big platform and people have been upgrading their PCs, but not a lot of people have been upgrading their PS4s. And also it can develop for a wider berth. You can even have I think Fortnite's a great example of, you can have high-end Fortnite, which does look pretty good. I'm not going to say it's like Wukong levels of stunner visuals, but it does look good. Or it can scale all the way down to mobile. It can be a game that can do a wide swath of visual fidelities. So I do think PC becomes all the more attractive in the current climate we're in.
Well, Black Myth Wukong is out, and the fall holiday season of releases, I think, has officially begun. Pretty soon we'll be getting Star Wars Outlaws, Warhammer 40k, Space Marine 2, and my personal most anticipated game of the year, Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, which is coming out in September.
No.
Let's go.
Let's frickin' go. And that leads us into October, where we can look forward to games like Metaphor Refantagio, and Dragon Age The Veilguard. We'll be doing a fall preview really soon, perhaps as soon as next week. So please look forward to that. In the meantime, let's roll into the tavern, settle down by the fire, and talk about what we've been playing. My friends, I am in deep trouble because as part of this charity stream, I committed to a lot of different projects. Some of them include playing through Baldur's Gate 3 with Eric and Nadia, which was a lot of fun. We were having a great time.
It was a good time.
If you haven't been paying attention to that, I started up a character. She's a drow rogue named Dark Cat, who has the Dark Urge. And I'm trying to play her as cold and kind of forceful, a little brusque, uses intimidation to kind of get what she wants. Eric is like an ICP Joker orc.
Crash and the Boys is
Crash
a
and the Boys.
legendary warrior.
Yeah.
I don't know where his backstory is at this point, because we keep rewriting it, much like the Joker. We keep changing what his backstory is, and honestly, it might change again, because now he might become a magic user, because we could honestly use some magic in the party versus another frontliner.
Well, we got Karlak in, and we liked what Karlak brought to the group so much that we were like, what if Crash and the Boys is a cleric for some reason?
Yeah, what if Crash and the Boys found God? Lost and insecure.
Amazing.
I like this. We're cooking right now. And then Nadia's character.
Nadia's a druid,
God.
and just going around talking to all the cows.
Lonk, Pennsylvania loves to talk to animals.
Yes. So we're like a roving gang that just happened to find ourselves on an Ithlid spaceship, and all kinds of crazy things are happening now. The final image that we had from our most recent playthrough was Karlak running around destroying a house, which was amusing. But go check that out. We'll be doing another stream, I think relatively soon, perhaps as soon as this week. Poke, Eric. Maybe we can make something happen so that we can keep the momentum up with our Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough 1 year after its release. But another project that I committed to, because we hit the $15,000 mark on our charity stream, was that I will be playing Final Fantasy XIV all the way through the Heaven's Word expansion. God knows how much further beyond after that. I went and I blew the dust off my Mog Station account, got it all reinstalled. I'm currently in the process of figuring out how to get it on my Steam Deck. Went and played one quest in A Realm Reborn and completed it. It was very easy. I killed some monsters in a forest or something. And I do not know what my character's all about, except that she's a very tall elf lady with a dye patch, which is cool, and an archer. I'm currently on the Ultros server, and yeah, here we go. Starting up again. I'm kind of looking forward to using this as an opportunity to watch some Game Center CX while I play through some quests and whatnot. But a special thanks to Tyler and Ryan for helping me figure out how to get this monster on my Steam Deck. It's like 100 gigs, and I kind of wish that I had a much bigger Steam Deck amount of space on my Steam Deck, because I had to clean out the proverbial fridge to be able to do it. But here we go, Final Fantasy 14. It's happening. Brian, do you like Final Fantasy 14?
I was actually going to ask you, because this is one that I actually recently downloaded, but I've never played. Any tips for jumping in for the first time here?
Well, I'm like level 28 right now. And I mean, Eric could probably answer that question a little bit easier, except to say, do the free trial, because that'll take you all the way through
Stormblood.
Is it called Stormblood?
Yeah, Stormblood now. Stormblood.
Stormblood?
Yeah.
I always lose track. I always confuse Stormblood and Shadowbringers.
Yeah, because it's the same one. Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes through Stormblood. That's 2 expansions. That's a lot of game right there. Also, after that, yeah.
I'll also say that like where Stormblood leaves off in the post patches is maybe one of the biggest, maybe the second biggest cliffhanger in Final Fantasy XIV. The first one being the end of the Realm Reborn post patches. So like, I think it's incredibly effective marketing for them to like end it there, because I think if you get all the way to that point in the story, you are going to be incredibly invested and want to know what happens next, because it is, oh my god, it's still some of the best 14 content in my humble opinion. I think like end of Stormblood post patch into Shadowbringers is just incredible. It's so good. But like, I don't know, beginner tips, just play the MSQ, do the story. It's a very story driven MMO, I would say. Don't get sidetracked. Don't do side quests. The side quests are basically there to like level your alt jobs, and even then they're not great for that. I would say do side quests that they're like blue and they have a plus sign on them. Those like add new like gameplay activities, so maybe they open up an optional dungeon, or that's how you get like a certain mount or a minion or something like that. But other ones, they're just like normal looking quests. They're just there for experience. I know Vic is probably like screaming at me from the edit bay right now, like they're all crucial. But I look forward to the post production edit on this one. But otherwise,
it's your old pal Vic, and I just want to say the side quests are all essential here. By the way, go listen to Charlene Dropout's Axe of the Blood Gods companion podcast about Final Fantasy XIV. Back to the show.
So Eric,
did I do your job for you, Vic?
So Eric, I know from listening to your other podcast you do with Kenneth Shepard, Normandy FM, that you are also a fan of the Final Fantasy series at large.
Oh yeah.
I listened to the entire series of the Final Fantasy X and X-2 playthrough that you did, and actually played along with you. My favorite RPG of all time is Final Fantasy X.
Hell yeah.
And so I really enjoyed that. And that was the first time I played X-2, actually, was alongside you guys. So that was really fun. However, what I'm curious about, because I see people just raving about 14, just constantly saying, like, you know, there's that meme of, like, play critically acclaimed MMORPG, Final Fantasy, whatever it is. And I want to know, like, because, you know, I think that I was, like, coming off the high that was Final Fantasy X back in the PS2 era. I was like, oh, Final Fantasy 11, my time to shine with a new Final Fantasy game. And then I was like, oh, wait, it's online? Wait, what? And it just, I completely skipped to 12 at that point. So how does the connective tissue, such as there is any, exist within Final Fantasy 14 with the rest of the series? I know there's like summons and I saw that there are some like recognizable summons and everything, but what else is there?
Oh, I mean, Kat will know this too, but like 14, it's pretty common to call it like a Final Fantasy theme park in ways, because everything in 14 can link back to other stuff in the Final Fantasy series, from characters having similar names and looks to even there being like there are actual characters from like the Ivalice raids have some of the Final Fantasy Tactics characters, and even Final Fantasy 12 when you get into Baja, I think it is, and Save the Queen and all that ties in actual characters and stories from Ivalice in those games. Other times, like a lot of trials, all the trials that you will do in the game are based on actual bosses or enemies or villains from the Final Fantasy series. There are ones that are original to 14. It's not all just playing the hits, and they do some really cool reimaginings of characters. One of my personal favorites, because I'm doing the Eden raids right now, and even Eden, Final Fantasy 9, 8, I don't know, I'm hazy, but that has a battle against a version of Rama that's like a centaur with wings, and I jokingly refer to him as Hot Rama because he's got like a six pack and all that. It's like, oh, they made Rama hot. But there are different Shiva fights, for example, Leviathan, Titan, Ifrit, but even Anima shows up at one point. That's actually a really, really fun fight. The Magus sisters show up. There's actually a lot of Endwalker has FF10 stuff in it, especially like the first half of Endwalker is very FF10 laden. That's kind of the cool thing, is you get two different expansions and you can see like, oh, they definitely drew inspiration from and played with a lot of ideas from these Final Fantasies, and so that's really fun to see those connections. And also now I'm playing FF6 for the first time and I'm seeing like Doma, and I'm like, oh, that's Doma. That's where that came from. That's so cool, because Doma is a major area in Stormblood and becomes like a really big place and like an actual thing that you have to navigate, deal with. It's a faction essentially, and seeing it in the actual like FF6 where it started was so cool. And so that's kind of like the interesting thing, is there is so much connective tissue.
Brian, assuming that you don't get into Final Fantasy 14 and become a complete Final Fantasy 14 sicko along with the rest of the dropouts, what have you been playing?
So the interesting thing about my current situation is I've been doing a lot of stuff that I can't quite talk about yet. I can mention that I've been playing Star Wars Outlaws. Can't say anything more than that. But outside of that, I think I also have been playing Star Wars Outlaws. I also can't mention anything more than that.
I haven't. I can't mention anything more than that.
You can probably talk more about it than we can at this point.
Yeah, actually. Yeah.
But yeah, outside of that, I've been checking out the two American football games that have come out recently. I'm very excited that college football is back. The game, not the actual season, but I'm excited for that too. It's always fun for me.
So you're still playing it? I just deleted it off my PS5.
I've only played not too much of it. I'm more of a fan of like less of the gameplay and more of like the dynasty and everything. Like I'm always a franchise.
You like the dynasty mode?
I haven't put enough time into it to really give like a full assessment. I'm in my first year, so I haven't like progressed too far.
I found it pretty boring.
Madden.
If you don't mind me saying, one of my biggest problems with EA's modes, and I promise I won't get too deep into this, it's a lack of storytelling. And I don't mean like I want cutscenes and stuff. I mean, I want the game to make me feel like I want it to be more reactive. Yes. I want it to make me feel like my decisions matter. And it's all too abstract. And that's why just ultimately I end up bouncing off it, because the simulation elements aren't strong enough for me.
The thing that drives me the most like wild about these modes is when they have like a social media feed and you're like, oh, that's cool, I'm going to do something in the game and they're going to react to it. And that goes so far when it works. But then there's other times where they'll have that and they just won't ever mention anything you do. Or they'll mention stuff that just has nothing to do with you. And you're like, well, what's the point of this?
It's very perfunctory. And then you compare it to NBA 2K and games like that, where it does have much more of a role-playing element to how you are running your characters, much more of a wish fulfillment aspect to it that tends to be lost. I think a lot of people complain about FIFA's franchise mode, and for good reason. Now it's called EA Sports FC. But one thing that it always did pretty well, actually, was that it would spin up these mini storylines in which a character would become unhappy, or demand a transfer, and then you would see headlines about it, and you would talk to them and be like, what's going on? And we're like, oh, nothing's going on. You're all fine. But actually, they want to leave. It's like a whole thing. which really ties into Football Manager. And everybody's eyes are glazing over as we speak. RPG fans, you know how I say RPGs and sports not as far away from it as you think, because there are stats and narrative. It's all happening, but it's just men kicking a ball around, or women kicking around a ball too. And instead of using swords and magic, though, I'm watching Arsenal versus Aston Villa right now, and it'd be pretty cool if a dragon showed up. I'm not going to lie.
That would be sick.
That would be. Oh my God! Arsenal just cast their summon, and here comes Bahamut, and they missed the goal, and it's still 0-0.
Arsenal has assembled the 7 Dragon Balls. Here comes Shenron. What wish will they ask for? I agree with you, Kat. I agree with everything you have said. And I think the funny thing with college football especially is that the narrative ends up being the one that you build around it with other people. So I know a group of folks that are playing a league, and their whole vibe is that they are trying to basically have an actual league that they run where they play games. They actually do press conferences afterwards and stuff like that, which is very funny. They'll give like statements on their losses and things like that, and they kind of RP out this entire college football season that is happening. And I think in that respect, there is an engine there that works for them, that drives what they want to do for it. And so that is a very traditional role-playing idea, right? But I think that's very, very meta. They're adding an entire layer of gameplay that's not there. And by the way, I think it's cool that you can do an online league in college football. It reminds me a little bit of there are these reels that were popping up with me for a while of someone walking in and discovering their boyfriend in front of one of those backdrops that they do press conferences for after an FPL game, and go, yeah, and that was a really tough. What are you doing? Well, I'm doing a press conference. I just lost in Football Manager. You're doing a press conference? Yeah. People do that. I love that.
This is a thing.
Look, dudes rock, okay? Dudes rock. And I love that for dudes. It's a very dudes rock moment, but like I'll
never begrudge men their joy. It's sort of like the men who are building flight simulator cockpits in their garage, and they're like, and I'm just bringing it into a landing, and then somebody somewhere on the other side of the country is role-playing as a air traffic controller. This is the thing that happens. This is real.
That. I love that for them. Dudes rock. But I think CFB was an interesting first draft of a game, but the UI especially, oh my God, the UI in that game is just, it kills it every time I want to go in and play a Dynasty. Yeah. I think that's what they really got to figure out.
There's something about that game that's a little too stilted for me and makes it hard for me to keep going. Also, I have a theory around multiplayer games, which is they should never go longer than 15 minutes if you can help it. Anything longer than the 15 minutes, you're going to have trouble. And a structural problem with the college football / Madden games is you're probably going to be spending closer to 30 minutes. So anyway, that was our sports corner. Are you playing anything else, Brian?
Just those and Star Wars Outlaws, and there's a couple of games that are on the horizon that I'm very much looking forward to, so I will probably be clearing my plate once those come out. Most notably, I'm extremely excited for Metaphor. I think that's a game, I'm such a fan of that team. Like, Persona 3, 4, 5, just amazing. So to see that team tackle kind of the high fantasy setting is really exciting for me.
Eric, how about you? What are you playing?
Speaking of multiplayer games that take over 30 minutes to finish a match, we can finally talk about it now. It still feels weird to say, but we can talk about Deadlock, which is a new video game from Valve Corporation that exists, and y'all totally didn't see coming. Surprise. Who knew that it was out there?
A game that literally everybody's been playing, or thousands of people have been playing already?
I literally, I went to New York about a week ago at this point, and right before I left, I got an invite to the Deadlock play test, whatever you want to call it, from not from media, not from like Valve itself, but from just a random friend that I used to play Dota with sent me the invite. Like that was the scale at which these things were going out. So I'm kind of surprised that Valve thought it could keep the lid on for so long, and I think
it's a little weird. I think they just didn't want the media writing a story about it. That was the problem that they were kind of facing.
Yes, and I will say, like, something interesting that I've noticed, and I alluded to it earlier in the podcast, is that Riot Games also recently held a playtest for 2XKO, and that was an alpha. Like, that was a very early look. It had a lot of unfinished stuff in there, a lot of like things they were still working out, like UI that was not like totally finished, ideas, and they were just putting it out there to say like, hey, play it and tell us what's up, like give us feedback. Deadlock does feel that way too, where there is so much stuff that is still very clearly like they are working on it, they are like building this thing, and they're putting a version of it out there that is playable. But I think for years we got used to the idea of the beta that was really more of like a marketing tool. Like, this game is essentially finished, maybe there's balance tweaks to be made, but this is like early access. This is a finished game that they're just kind of putting out there to like drum up some hype and get people interested. No, Deadlock is definitely early, and that's like the first thing I'll say. But broadly, I'm not going to get into like super granular MOBA specifics about like what this game is, but I do need to stress, like, it's a MOBA. Like, it is not Overwatch. It's not even Marvel Rivals, where like you're going to be pushing a payload and doing these like matches where you're going in, you're doing your fight. There is team fighting, but like, I think we're
What year is this?
Well,
I mean, another MOBA? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, well, it's a MOBA in an age where I feel like the MOBA is not dead, but the MOBA is very solidified. It's like a lake that has like just existed for years, and no rock, no bird, no fish has ever gone into it. It just has what it has in it. It's a still lake, and now Valve is trying to hurl a boulder into the middle of it and be like, here's Deadlock. And
well, good luck to them.
I find it,
you know what the best MOBA is?
What's up?
Pokemon Unite.
No, not
Great
even close.
MOBA. Yeah. The second best MOBA is Heroes of the Storm.
Baby.
Great MOBA. R.I.P.
Oh god, don't sidetrack me with Pokemon Unite and why I have so many things to say about that game. But Kenneth Shepard and I need to remain friends, so I won't say them. But
do you play Pokemon Unite?
I've played a lot of Pokemon Unite, yes.
You weren't playing with me?
No.
I've been needing a team. Eric, I'm heartbroken.
So I think this is maybe illustrative of what I think Deadlock's problem is going to be. Deadlock is a MOBA for people who like MOBAs and want to play that in a shooter form. It is super in-depth. There are character synergies. The whole idea it has about you build these mods that slot into different archetypes that you have. So you have like weapon, spirit, vitality, and you buy mods that attach to them that change the way your character operates and then adds different effects and things like that. It's very, very in-depth. It's a very like, even the shooting feels like very involved, and you have like a stamina system that determines your jumps and your sprints and all that. It's like there's so much going on that like I think an Overwatch player is going to hop into it and just die in lane repeatedly. I've had this happen in solo queue games where I just watch someone die like 7 times in a row in their lane because they try to play it like a shooter. They try to just go shoot their enemy and win. And they just feed, and they give the other team so many like souls and resources to spend on items that just make them more powerful. So now they're like losing faster and losing worse, and it can get away from you the way that a MOBA game can get away from you when you do that. It's not something where you just like, oh, I fight, oh, I respawn, I come back, it's all good, I've got all my stuff, like I just have 4 abilities and I'm gonna fight. And it's, I think Pokemon Unite is more in that direction, where like you are just kind of playing a MOBA style game, but you're kind of really just dependent on your XP and your experience, but also like just your abilities and what you do as a character. I really find that this is a super high-end MOBA that wants to really ask you to do complicated things, to think about high-level concepts, to plan, to strategize, to think about hero synergies and team comps. So I find it really fascinating for that. It's got some really cool ideas about how to evolve the MOBA genre in ways, especially when you turn it into a shooter. But I think it's going to make some people bounce off it initially, the same way that like 2XKO made a lot of people who were like, I like to play Smash. Were like, oh my God, this game is incredibly in depth. There's a lot happening here, and I'm getting rocked by people who know how to put combos and mix-ups down. And so that's the weird thing I find about Deadlock is I think there's going to be kind of an ebb and flow to it where people are going to catch the hype, be like, oh, it's a new hero shooter. People are hungry for a new hero shooter. Like Overwatch 2, like you said, was struggling. And then they're going to get into it and they're going to be like, either this is too in depth for them. They don't want to play 30, 60-minute matches. You know, there are 60-minute matches possible in this game.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's and they're gonna bounce off, but then like Marvel Rivals is coming up. I think that's maybe more if you want an alternative to Overwatch, that's what you should be looking at. Whereas if you want a new MOBA, if you want something that's gonna like make your brain, your gray matter sizzle in ways like the way I've just been constantly thinking about this game for the last week or so and thinking about stuff, maybe that's what it's for. But I'm curious to see what audience latches onto this game ultimately.
Well, Valve should just go make an RPG, is what I'm saying. I would love to see what Valve could come up with in that genre. And in any event, it does feel notable that Valve is actually making something as opposed to raking in their hundreds of millions of dollars so that Gabe Newell can sit on a boat or live in New Zealand or something. But, all right, that's it for the tavern. Brian... The last time we had Alex on, we said, talk a little bit about Game Informer if you want. Maybe share a memory. Do you have any great memories that you want to like kind of relate as we pour one out for the late, great Game Informer?
I mean, so many. Too many to really cover on a single episode of a podcast. But, you know, just like, I always want to kind of default back to, like, you know, having been at Game Informer for almost 10 years, it's like you really get to go on like a lot of studio visits and trips and everything and get to interface directly with the people who make these games. And I think that when I got into this space, you know, I've been a gamer since, you know, God, like early 90s was when I got into video games. And I always thought that like, oh, my favorite part of video games is always going to be the video games, because what else would it be? But like, I think that it's become pretty obvious to me that my favorite part of the video games is always like kind of meeting the people who make them and getting to pick their brains. And there are a few sections or a few times that I've really like had a chance to do that. I mean, there's hundreds of times I've had a chance to do that, but there's a few that really stick out in my mind as like, these are times that I'm just going to like remember for the rest of my life, because it was such a fascinating conversation with people who have been doing this for decades upon decades. The recent examples I can think of were last year I got to sit down with Shigeru Miyamoto and Koji Kondo together, and you know, that was just you couldn't ask for more experienced people, because I don't know if more experienced people exist in the games industry. And you know, just being able to sit down with them together, lob questions their way so that they could play off of each other, like asking how their collaboration has changed over the years, because they've been working together for so freaking long at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy since they've been working together since the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, since 1980.
An incomprehensible amount of time to be in the games industry.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be coming up on 50 years of working together before too long here. And the other example that happened last year as well was late last year. I got to sit down when I was visiting Square Enix out in Tokyo for the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth cover story that I wrote. I got to basically hold court for 2 hours straight with a panel that consisted of Tetsuya Nomura, Yoshinori Kitase, and Naoki Hamaguchi, and just basically chat with them for 2 hours straight. And it was like such a fun conversation, because again, it was one of those things where I could just lob a prompt their way and then have these people who have, you know, Hamaguchi is, I mean, he's been there since the early 2000s, so it's hard to call him new blood. But when compared to somebody like Kitase or Nomura, he is the new blood, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like how, like, you know, we look at Nintendo and we're like, oh, you know, Takashi Tezuka is working with the young gun Shiro Mori on new Super Mario Brothers Wonder. But Mori, he worked on Super Mario Brothers or Super Mario Sunshine, so it's like he's been around forever as well. But these companies have just been the way they retain the talent like these people. It makes them feel like the young guns. But yeah, just being able to hear the insight that these extremely experienced developers are willing to share and bounce off each other. Those are always the moments that stick with me. And then, getting to know these developers who it's so easy to kind of just look at their work and be like, okay, well, I think I have an understanding of how these guys create games or how these women create games. And being able to pick their brains at such a granular level was always the thing that attracted me the most to get excited about doing this work and going forward and going on these trips, and also getting to know them on a somewhat personal level. Because, while we're setting up the cameras for the interviews or whatever, and sometimes we'd be able to like convince them to do like extracurricular activities. Like when I went to Osaka for Street Fighter 6's cover story, we convinced them of like, hey, the arcade scene is pretty big for Street Fighter. You want to go to an arcade and just let's shoot you guys playing Street Fighter at the arcade. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. So, you get to know them through doing things like that too. So I believe that video is still on YouTube if you want to go watch basically the video that we shot of them.
I haven't nuked the Game Informer channel yet.
No, just the Twitter account and the website, which is a whole nother conversation.
Well, the YouTube channel was one of the best parts of that online presence, so I'm glad it's still around.
Yeah, and shout out to the folks over at MinMax. I believe they are doing an archival project, the community over there, and trying to archive as much of the Game Informer YouTube channel as possible, just on the off chance that it goes the way of the Twitter account and the website. So I'm also doing a bit of an archival process just for the stuff that like I was most excited about to write. So I've been utilizing the Wayback Machine and trying to get as many of my favorite stories that I wrote for the website saved locally, and then maybe in the future I'll be able to have some way to preserve them on the internet. But we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's just getting to know the folks behind these games, and even like I've gotten to know people like Sam Lake over the years from all the interactions, and just I cannot say enough great things for so many people in this industry, and I'm extremely grateful to have been a part of it for the past 16 years, and I hope to continue to be a part of it for the foreseeable future.
Pouring one out for Game Informer. I really miss magazines in part because you never thought it would be possible with a word count, but one of the things that I really enjoy about the format is being able to have long conversations and do long profiles, and Game Informer was really great for that. So thank you for everything that you've done over the years, Brian, and to everybody else over at Game Informer.
Yeah, it was a really special thing, and I keep saying whenever anybody asks me about like the layoffs and everything and the closure, it's like, yeah, like the biggest like kind of tragedy or sadness in my mind is that like I no longer have a job. All these people that I love, that I worked with so closely over the last several years, no longer have a job. But there's that extra layer of sadness that like also my favorite magazine no longer exists. It's like, yeah, that's like it's just it's not fun.
And that's it for this week's episode of Axe of the Blood God. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much to Brian for coming on the show. Really appreciate having you. We'd love to hear your thoughts about everything that we've been talking about on the show this week, as always. And we'll be heading into the Axe of the Blood God post-show with our Stars of Destiny. Once again, this week we're joined by Anthrax Bees, Azixa, Drew RWX, Harvest Lunatic, JB, Laguna Matata, Mango Olds, Mick Gregg, Sardin, Spooky Man, and Spyrus. Thank you so much for your generous support. Please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/bloodgodpod, where we have so much excellent bonus material just for you, including the Pantheon of the Blood God. We'll be back next week to talk more about the genre that we love. I've been your host, Kat Bailey, and for Brian, Eric, and myself, thanks for listening, and happy adventuring.